In the Beginning series, a series of presentations on origins by some Dr. Stan Hudson. I don't know who that guy is. But all they're interesting topics. Anyway, about 3 years ago, the Tacoma Church asked me to do a series in downtown Salem. And we did it in an old theater. I mean, it was like a 1920s theater. The big, stage with the orchestra pit and everything. It's a really cool venue. Anyway, we recorded 7 talks, and that's what these are. And they're on Hope Channel if some of you have seen them. So we have this and this, 1 each, 2 each.
Okay.
So
let's.
And how can you get them later if you don't?
If you do not get them later, the pastor will be happy to connect you with us at the union office on how to get these.
Andreas, would you pick one of these? All right. So we have. I'm sorry. Ron and Janelle Clendenin. Are they here? They're not here.
Oh, okay.
All right. Try again. All right. Very good. Let's see. Darlene Waybright. Is Darlene here? All right. Andreas, let's see. Darlene, would you like the
book or the DVDs?
Or the DVD?
DVDs.
DVD.
Yeah, he's
All right.
really interesting.
Pick me one more. Thank you. Okay, is Willa here? Willa Stewart? All right. Would you like the book or the DVD? DVD.
Okay.
All right.
Where? Okay.
Did you pick one?
There you go. You're welcome.
All right.
Okay, we got books, and these are good books.
You. Anitza Hess? We've got books. We've got a book for Anitza.
Would you like a book or a book?
Grab me one more.
There, you're welcome.
Okay. And John and Donna Weaver. All right, they've got let's get them a book too.
Okay. There you go, sir. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Stan, thank you for bringing those.
Yeah.
I will let you get to your last talk.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm up. Okay, let's do it. Let's talk about the flood. And the flood is interesting why do creationists talk so much about the flood? Well, it's fun. No, that sounds terrible. The thing is, it's got left physical evidence. Now, when you talk about the book of Genesis, how can you, from science, prove a 6-day creation? God said, let there be light, and there was light. How can you prove that scientifically? Can't. You can show evidence for design, what are the chances that nature could do all this itself, and all that. But in terms of 6-day creation, the first couple of chapters of Genesis, very hard. But the flood is another matter. And there's lots of physical evidence from the flood. And so creationists do spend time talking about the flood because if they can get open-minded people to say, well, maybe that actually did happen, maybe they'll look at the rest of Genesis in the same way. And so we do spend time on the flood. So here we go. Now, I told you about this, the war on science and the war on religion. There is a lot of changing views. Oh, I don't need to show this again. I've showed this before. You're already smart on this. Let's just keep going. But the creation view, and wait a minute now. This is the flood, correct? Yes, it is. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to skip right to this because I'm going too long. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, there's plenty of water on planet Earth. If you were to take the Earth, the planet, smooth the mountains down, fill in the valleys, make it as round as a marble, there would be 5,000 feet of water completely encircling the globe. Lots of water here, okay? So enough water is plenty. The earth also was corrupt before God, and I want you to understand what triggered the flood in God's thinking. The earth was filled with violence, so God looked upon the earth. Indeed, it was corrupt, for all flesh is corrupted their way on the earth, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh. Notice the all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through all flesh. Now, that includes the animal kingdom. God could have thought of a way of simply judging man if man alone was the problem without affecting the animals. Is that not true? Could he have thought of something that would have dealt with the human violence without touching the animals? But the animal kingdom, likewise, can I put it this way, was targeted by God for the flood. So the animal kingdom also. Now, why did God wait so long as he did? Fact of the matter is, he got down to just one family. Just one. The earth had gotten so bad, just one family was left to him that was listening and open to him at all. And if he allowed the violence to continue for one more segment of time, that family might have been gone too. And there would go the line that would produce someday Jesus, our Savior. So all those that had been saved, shall we say, by God before, including Enoch, who walked with God, all those people would be lost because the Savior was not born. That's how patient God is. That's how patient. He waits to as long as he possibly can with an invitation. So the search for Noah's Ark now, if you've been around Adventist churches or conservative churches, period, over the years you have heard stories of looking for the ark. Am I right? Search for Noah's Ark. It's a big deal. I have followed these stories too. Good news is they have found it. There it is. There's an article right there. And it's been found. Found on Mars. Bible shocker. Well, yeah, I guess. The point that I put that up for is to make is this. A lot of the stories have been very sensational stories. Very hard to prove, but very headline-oriented stories. What do we actually know about the real search for Noah's Ark? Now, one of the things that you need to know about this is, first of all, and the Bible says it came down in the mountains, plural, of Ararat. So some region around Ararat, somewhere there. Now, Ararat is on the Russian-Turkish border. How many of you remember, and I think some of you do, looking around this group, how many of you remember the Cold War? When we were really worried about the Russians. I grew up in Los Angeles, and we would have air raid drills in our schools. And when we heard that siren go off, get under the desk, because if the Russians dropped an atomic bomb, you'd be safe there. Remember? So we remember the Russians, and guess what? The Turks also were worried about the Russians. And the Turks did not want a bunch of free, happy Christians traipsing around that Turkish-Russian border area, and who knows what they were going to do. So they tended to keep people away and off the mountain. Now, whatever happens when a government keeps anybody away from anything? What are they hiding, you know? What are those Muslim people, hiding from us Christians kind of thing? So there was that kind of dynamic as well. Meanwhile, there are stories about people having found the ark years ago, and those wanted to be looked at. Now, incidentally, well, I'm going to show that in a minute. Let me tell you real quickly, the two areas. There's a gulf where supposedly an Armenian father took his son back around World War I era. They went up there, it was a large object. He put his son on the stairway, he walked up on top, and he walked down the length of this large object. We go to that gulf, to that same gorge today, it is not there. There's nothing there. Walk all the way to the same area, not there. The other place is a rock formations on one side that has been promoted as a petrified section of the ark. Have you heard of that story? That petrified area has been looked at very carefully by creation-oriented scientists. 95% of them say it is a rock formation, not petrified boat. And then there are other rock formations similar in the area. I've looked at that story as well. The most conservative Christian ministries that I know of that has no problem believing the ark existed and the flood story is true have said that the ark itself is not going to be found because it's not been found yet. Now, today we've got satellite imagery that we didn't have 50 years ago. And if you're standing on Mount Ararat and you're reading the morning paper, they can tell you exactly what you're reading. Those satellites are that powerful. We've looked at every square inch of Mount Ararat, there's nothing there. And with whatever you want to call about climate change and the dwindling snow cover, there's nothing. So, I have a theory. It's a great theory. Why? Because you can't disprove it. I believe that the people on the ark got off the ark, looked around, said, where's the Home Depots around here? Where's the Lowe's? There's not even a Walmart. There's nothing. And there's no forests either. And they looked around for building materials. I think they stopped and they looked back at the ark. There is Home Depot. So I think they disassembled it and used it for other things. That makes total sense to me. And that's exactly what ancient people did, is they were recycling building things. Can't disprove it. Okay, however, you can go see the ark today in Kentucky. There it is. Noah's Ark, right? The Ark Experience. That's the opening day a couple summers ago. And this is a full-scale ark. 3 decks. Same size, even a little bit bigger using the Egyptian cubit. So, okay, there it is. And it is amazing. It's worth the go. I mean, everybody wants to go to Kentucky for their vacation. Include this on your trip. And it is cool because it does have the 3 decks inside. The decks are, bottom deck is animals in cages with animal sounds, Disneyland type things. Second deck has storage units of bottles and bags, but also Noah's family where they lived. And then the top section had what I wanted to go to see, and that's science exhibits. So they had science exhibits, and I wanted to see if they were good science, and they were solid science. They weren't over the top. They weren't exaggerating on anything. It was good, solid, down-the-road science. And then at the back of it, on the back of the top layer there, way in the back, was a full gospel presentation from the fall of Adam and Eve all the way to the second coming. It's really well done. Now, if anybody here ever works with wood, gentlemen, you got wood shop stuff going on, you need to see this. It's wonderfully done. This cost $100 million to build. It's the largest wooden structure in the world. There are sprinklers in it. Oh, it's all the code. They had to do all that. So, bathrooms and everything, lights, they had to do that. But everything they could get away with in doing the old way with hand tools and everything they did. It's pretty cool. So anyway, you got to go. Do that someday. Now, if I'm a Bible skeptic, if I tend to believe the Bible's just any other human book, then I'm aware of this fact about the Babylonian flood called the Gilgamesh epic. Why is that important? Because it dates to the 21st century BC, recorded in cuneiform, and would therefore predate, by a good 600 years anyway, the recording of Moses and the Genesis account of the flood. So it's older in terms of being written down earlier. So if I'm a skeptic, what do I think? I think the biblical story is just a Hebrew version of an old Babylonian story. But the Babylonians weren't the only ones. Here, check this out. You have the Hebrew flood story, but you also have Babylonian, Egyptian, Persian, the Sumerians, the Assyrians. They all had flood stories in their memory. Let's go to Europe. Let's take a look at, for instance, the Romans had a flood story. The Greeks even had the date about right. The Celts, Scandinavians. Let's go to Africa. The Nigerians, the Congans, the Zairians, all of these are pre-missionary contact stories of the flood, even Pygmy. Let's keep going. Let's go to Asia. Mongolians, the Eastern Russians, the Koreans, the Philippines, Sumatrans. These all have flood stories. The Chinese even have it in their characters, their early characters have indications of flood stories. Let's go to the South Pacific, Australians. Now that would be the Aborigines, the Tahitians, Hawaiians, and Maori. Are you seeing a pattern here? Let's go to the Americas. And some of the ancient tribes like Mayans and Toltecs, as well as what do you think of more modern like Cherokee and Lakota, and even Eskimo have flood stories. This is the Native American Museum, part of the Smithsonian collection. in Washington, D.C. This is did you know the Smithsonian had a Native American history museum? It is there. And the interior is like a teepee. It winds way up to the top, and the oldest displays are up there. Time out. I went there, and there was a Native American woman tour guide with a tour group with her, and she was describing things inside the display cases. And she said, she was looking at some things, and then she looked at her group, and she said, my people, talking about her tribe, my people have a flood story. You people do too, right? Then she paused, and she said, maybe there's something to it. And I thought, in the Smithsonian Institution, you know, only a Native American could probably get away with that. But anyway, the point is this: when you have all these corners of the world, they don't have ancient stories of earthquakes, giant earthquakes, or, you know, hurricanes, or any other tropical kind of whatever. They don't have them. It's all a consistent flood story. What are the things that vary in them? Lots of things vary, but it's usually something like this: the gods were angry with man and tried to destroy them with a worldwide flood. Some smart aleck person somehow snuck on a log, on a raft, somehow made it through and repopulated the world afterwards. It's only the Hebrew story that has a picture of a God providing safety for those who wanted to escape. But other than that, worldwide flood story, interesting. Maybe there's something to it. So, for years in Western civilization, the concept of when you look at the Earth's crust, the mountains and valleys, what you're seeing are the remnants, the last little bits of the flood, the receding waters and so forth, shaped what we saw. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep were open, and the fountains could also mean volcanic fountains as well. And that was a standard understanding for centuries until something changed at our universities. It wasn't immediate, it was a subtle change. Darwin was affected by that change. And that is the rise of secular humanism, and frankly, the decline of Christianity in our institutions of study. And that was during the Age of Reason, what do you want to call it, the 1700s and 1800s. People were becoming less believers of the Bible and more believers in man's ability to judge things on his own. Now, if you think about it, us Protestants benefited from this pendulum. Because if you think about it, you could look at history this way. Let's say the 1500s, 1400s. Man was beginning to be tired of the authority of the Pope, and we rejected that authority. A couple hundred years later, some countries in Europe were getting tired of the authority of the kings and made parliaments and things to soften and weaken those powers. Keep on going. Age of Reason, people are tired of all authority. Let's get rid of God, let's get rid of the Bible, French Revolution and so forth. Secular humanism. And that's kind of where we are as far as the pendulum swing is now. So the decline of Christianity, and you could easily call Europe post-Christian now. Post-Christian. So you have people like James Hudson, father of modern geology, proposing uniformitarianism. Now what in the world is that? Sounds like a church. First church of uniformitarianists. Okay? Earth's surface has only been altered by slowly and currently observable processes. And that is absolutely not a flood, which is called catastrophism. The major events formed by catastrophes over against slow processes. All right, so only conservatively observable, and that was most definitely a move away from the Bible, purposely away from the Bible. They knew the ramifications of that in their world, and they stuck to their guns. Okay. Now, that's been the standard understanding of the Earth's history for a couple centuries now, that everything we see is basically from, let me give you an example of what uniformitarianism is. Let's go to the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon. How much dirt comes out of the Colorado River into the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of California every year in, let's say, 1 year? How much dirt comes out? Okay, you measure that. How much dirt's missing in the Grand Canyon? Do the math. That's how old the Grand Canyon is, end of story. Period. No other further questions are needed. So that is gradualism. That's uniformitarianism. And incidentally, that is a method that science uses. That's the default mechanism for everything relating to measurements. In other words, the decay of rocks, age of the Earth. How many tree rings? How thick is the ice sheets? All of that is basically uniformitarianism. How fast is it now? That's the answer. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. If it doesn't, I'm sorry. It's the lunch. It's not me. It's the lunch. So that's been the standard understanding until a guy like this came along, J. Harlan Bretz, a UW geologist. I've done this talk in Pullman, and I said, sorry, Cougs, this is a Husky. It's UW, geologist. He went up to Dry Falls. You ever been to Dry Falls? North Central Washington. Went up to this place up here, took a look at it, and even though there's a little water back here, there's no water coming over these cliffs, and clearly this is a Niagara Falls type thing. This used to be a fall like Niagara Falls, but there's no water here now. What's going on there? Because that's something that happened in the past that's not going on now, which is a no-no. Can't be. So he said, but gentlemen, talking to the geologists of America, something had to have happened here in the past. And they basically told him, we don't believe in floods, but in any case, where would the water come from? Okay, so he did some more studies, and he went up to Bozeman, Montana. And around Bozeman, Montana, if you look at the hills all around Bozeman, there are clearly shorelines all around Bozeman, Montana. To the extent that now there's no arguments that there was a giant lake there at one time. A giant lake caused by ice across the Clark Fork River, right up in here. So, at some point during what we would call the Ice Age, and we believe in the Ice Age, we're the only ones that have an explanation for what caused it. But anyway, during the Ice Age, there was a melting period, and somehow or other the water broke through that ice dam and emptied a lake that had water the size of Lake Superior, emptied it in a matter of 1 to 2 days. Think of the force and the amount of water coming out. And it's been estimated that it came over the Dry Falls and you couldn't even see it dropping as it came over. That's how fast it was coming. And this is the direction it came. Right on down there, went right past Spokane, where I used to live, up there in Spokane. And Spokane, where we lived in the valley, we lived on the side of a hill. Whenever we wanted to plant something, we would find these big river rocks in the ground, big round rocks. There's no creek around here. There's no river around here. Where did these come from? This, the Missoula Flood, as they call it now. Came down here, went right out the, whoops, come back here. Whoop. You got a sneaky preview. Came right out and widened the Columbia River Gorge. Some of the water spilled into the Willamette Valley. And they're finding boulders in the Willamette Valley from Montana here. Anyway, kind of fun. So, came over this and made this Dry Falls. Now, he took pictures of giant ripple marks from the air and tried to promote this concept. There was a flood that took place here, and there's no question. 40 years of presenting to the geologists of America, he finally got some of them to go out there in person and look. And they contacted him and said, Harlan, okay, we're now catastrophists. You're right, something did happen here. 40 years, why? Because their model was set, and that is gradualism. Catastrophes are not part of the process. They're more open to this now than they used to be, but it gives you an idea of the difficulties. He was alive, fortunately, still, when they came to the point of agreement with him. But you know what he said after all this? He said, now we need to look at the Grand Canyon. Because the Grand Canyon gives evidence of rapid formation and not slow. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. Where were you? And looking around this group, some of you were. Where were you? I hear you. That's a pre-picture. That's 1,100 feet higher picture. When we lost the top of Mount St. Helens in May 18, 1980, Sunday morning at about 8 o'clock. And where were you? And I know you got stories, but at the full blast of this, that was 1 atomic bomb per second in terms of power. 57 people died. 8 of them were in areas considered to be unsafe. They were in areas that they had permission to be in, 8 of them. 49 were in areas considered to be safe. The eruption was that much larger than what they expected it would be. Now, I want you to understand something here. This sounds a little funny, but for those of us who believe God has some power in these things, and I won't say schedules them, but allows them to happen at certain times in Earth's history, I believe God has allowed this to happen in our day, in our backyard, for we can study the effects of catastrophism and show lots of evidence from the flood, for the flood from this. I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. Oh boy, incidentally, volcanoes, think of volcanoes. I love volcanoes. Of course, I have geology nuts, so I love volcanoes, or just a nut. Anyway, think of volcanoes as 2 kinds for the sake of this argument. A volcano is a bump in the ground. Something's trying to get out, pushing up the ground, volcano. If the top of the ground has cracks in it, then the stuff trying to come out has an easy way of getting out. That's Hawaii. And the lava flows out those cracks and into the ocean and makes more Hawaii. That's a good thing. Others have corks on the top, no cracks. That's Mount St. Helens. So as the pressure was building under the top of Mount St. Helens, and in this case it's not lava so much as gas, the power was pushing up, and the north face of Helens was going out at about 5 feet a day, pushing out, bulging like this. Then there was a little bit of a tremor, little volcanic, seismic activity, and this north face broke free. When it slid down, that was a cork off the bottle, and out the eruption came. As you can see, look at this first picture here. This is the north side. The north side, the face that was up here, is broken free and is sliding down. As this is sliding down, it's releasing the cork, and boom, out it comes. And that was a powerful eruption. The shock wave from the eruption, superheated gas, came down the side of that hill at 300 miles an hour. You cannot outrun 300 miles an hour. And that was coming down with such force. I want you to think about this. It was hitting trees. And these trees were, this big around, many of them, and literally knocking them off of their stumps. Pop, 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 pop. Think of the force. Pop, 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 for miles. And just knocking them over. The superheated air burnt off, vaporized the bark, the needles, and the branches, and left so many square miles of giant toothpicks, okay, as you can see in this picture. Now, a lot of these giant tree stuff, denuded trees were basically laying down there. You can still see a lot of them today. But many of them washed down into Spirit Lake. This is looking from the north, looking south into the north top of what's left there. It used to be, think of the top of it being like this, blown out this way. And look at all of these trees that are in Spirit Lake. Now, these 2 scientists that you see in there are there with permission. They're creation scientists. And they said, will you let us study the logs that are in the water? And they got permission. And so they studied them. And this is what they found out about these logs. After a while, these logs that were floating like this, the base of them was a little bit wider, a little bit denser. And eventually these logs, some of them would float like this. Like this for a while, bob like this, and then eventually sink. And as they sank, they stuck into the soft bottom of the lake. Now here's a picture of one taken looking up at it floating, and here's one looking down on one that's already stuck in the bottom of the lake. This is all very interesting. And then they decided to study something else that relates. They went to Yellowstone. How many of you been to Yellowstone? Why do I not see every hand up? If God wanted to show you a piece of Garden of Eden, that's the closest place I can think of. Okay, anyway, gotta go. Okay, must go to Yellowstone. Not right now. Anyway, Specimen Ridge is a good hike up in the north part of Yellowstone, and this is where the famous petrified forest is. Petrified forest has lots of these trees standing out of the ground that are petrified. They're rockified. Big old giant ones you can't put your arms around, solid rock. And up and down the side of this hill with some 50-some layers of dirt and rock in there, these pop up at different layers, and so for the world it looks like a snapshot of, they say, at least 100,000 years. A long area. In other words, these grew here, they got covered up, they petrified, grew up more dirt, more trees, so forth on down onto the top there. And so, the same scientists that studied Spirit Lake's logs asked the Yellowstone National Park people, can we study these trees? And in particular, will you give us permission to dig around the base of these trees? What were they looking for? They were looking for roots. If they found roots, then the trees were petrified where they grew. If there are no roots there, those trees got there a different way. And did they find roots? They did not find roots. And so they published their findings, and now it is agreed. I don't know if you know, but Yellowstone, think of the bottom half of Yellowstone, is basically a giant caldera, a mega volcano. That's why you have half of the geysers in the world right there. It is an amazing place. The heat is up close, and lots of water, and that's how you get geysers. But anyway, it's a giant volcano. Incidentally, you know it's ready to go any moment. Enjoy your next visit when you go to Yellowstone. Okay, so anyway, no roots. They even checked the tree rings on the lower ones, compared them to the ones in the upper ones, and they had all been growing at the same time. So what happened is something similar to Mount St. Helens, only many times larger, with lots of sediment, lots of floating logs, and they got covered up and preserved. In other words, a rapid event, not a slow, gradual event. Because if you leave any tree out in the air for a while, you know it doesn't petrify, it deteriorates, it falls apart. So, interesting. So, I happened to be in Yellowstone at a bookstore while they had a DVD, Sights and Sounds of Yellowstone, so I'm, watching, listening to this, and they mentioned the petrified forest. So I said, okay, what do they say about it now? Thanks to studies down at Mount St. Helens, we now know that these were all the result of a volcanic eruption, and I'm thinking, yes. And do they thank creation scientists? Anyway, no, they don't. But we do ask other questions, and then some ask. Anyway, that was one thing. And then the other thing we found out about Age of the Earth issues, about Grand Canyon, there's a little Grand Canyon now below Mount St. Helens on the Toutle River. And what does it have? It's got rock layers, straight, flat layers that have now become rock, graded beds, colored, and the water carved out a canyon. So we got flat beds with a canyon, and kind of like this. Now, here's the thing that's interesting about these flat layers, and these are sometimes it's called analogous. Anyway, they are not matching up. And take a look right there. See that white layer right there? That supposedly was the top of the ground millions of years ago, and probably for a period of 1 million years. Now, what's interesting about these layers is you would think that if this were the top of the ground for 1 million years, there would occasionally be a little valley or a little, disconformity from the air and the erosions and so forth, because, even including Kansas, you cannot be perfectly flat everywhere. Okay, that was a joke. You're just smiling, but you're not laughing, so I don't know. Well, I guess I'll take smiling. So anyway, you cannot have flat layer for 1 million years. It just doesn't happen. And these are flat on top of other flat ones, on top of other flat ones. These are all sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock, sedimentary rock. How do you get flat, state-sized sedimentary deposits on top of each other? How do you even do that? Is it a river delta that's slowly but surely building up? Well, they're not flat. Then they kind of build up in certain fan shapes and so forth. These are not that way at all. These are big, flat ones. Whatever it did, that is not something that's going on now. That's very simple. Where's this? Monument Valley, right on the Utah-Arizona border area. And take a look at this area. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. It's easy to tell that this used to be the top of the ground around there. No question about it. They line up really well, those layers. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's missing. So where did all this stuff go? And I mean, it is not below. It's not even in the same zip code. It's gone. And there's only one natural force that can move that much material that far away that cleanly, and that is water, and lots of it. And incidentally, evolutionists will also agree this has something to do with a receding inland sea of some kind. They'll agree to that. What's interesting about this is up north or upstream from the Grand Canyon. So whatever carved this out, it's conceivable that the water continued on through the Grand Canyon area. Interesting. So, where does stuff like go? The question is always really, you can do science based on trying to answer a question. If you got a good question, you're going to do better science. Here's a good question. When we look at the crust of the earth, we know water's been involved. What better describes what we are seeing? Was it done with much water over little time or little water over much time? That's a really good basic science question. Okay, depends upon what glasses you look through. Okay, class, we're back in school. Let's see if you remember, what are the three basic kinds of rocks? Igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rock. Let's start with sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock are made of sediments, limestone, sandstone, shale, coal. When you sprinkle salt on your French fries, you're sprinkling little bits of rock. Good thing is they're water soluble. But anyway, you're sprinkling little bitty rocks on there that are sedimentary rocks. Okay, now you have igneous rock. Oh, how do you, for a minute on sedimentary rock. Think of sedimentary rock as this: destroyed rock. Because sediments means they are something previous to it that have been beaten into a pulp and reformed into a new rock. So whatever it went through before, the original has been completely destroyed, and you got these little pieces left. Am I right? That's sedimentary rock. Okay. Igneous rock is something that was ignited. Think of hot. It was hot at one time. It cooled. Granite, of course, does anybody know what basalt is called when it's liquid? Lava. Thank you. Okay, can I tell you my lava story? That's from Hawaii. My 25th wedding anniversary, ladies, points for that. Took my wife to Hawaii. Points? Points? Okay, points. On the very day of the anniversary, I wanted to go up where the lava was coming out. Okay, I'm losing some points on that. Anyway, so went over the national park, Volcanoes National Park, went up to the place where you could not drive any further because the lava had covered the road. Park there, get out. There's a little ranger kiosk there, little ranger woman in there, and I asked her, can I go up where the lava is coming out? What did I expect? No. No. She said, why, sure, just be careful. It's right up there. Not kidding you. She said that. So cleverly, the day before, because I wanted to collect a sample, I know the legalities, so I got myself a little metal thing here. In my mind, I was thinking, I'll just scoop it up. Okay, anyway. So when I get up there and I'm walking for miles and miles over these old lava flows, and I'm tracing them, heat mirage, heat signature, because you can't see during the daytime. At night you can see real easy, you can't see the red lava yet. So get up to the plate where it's steaming and coming out. Found it, there it is, it's coming out. I picked up a wooden walking stick along the way, which turned out to be a brilliant move. Because have you heard that lava is hot? I totally get the Daniel story about the fiery furnace. I never have a problem with that ever again. But anyway, okay, so I have this stick. The lava is really hot. I put this on a rock, empty. I got my long stick, and I'm poking it in the lava. And trust me, I could not get any closer than I am to that right there with the lava. It is that hot. 2,000 degrees. You know how hot that is? 4 times as high as you can set your oven, basically. Okay. I'm sticking this stick into the lava to try to get some lava to stick to the stick. And I poke it in there and catches fire drops, catches fire drops, catches fire. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, actually the lava was over here so I could switch over. And anyway, there, I had my hot water, my water bottle, and I poured it in there. There's my illegally collected piece of lava from the Hawaii's National Park. Is that cool? Guys, playing in lava? Someday, I'm going to break off a piece of this and send it into a dating lab and see what they feel is how old it is. Now, because I was there the day it was born, the rock was born, because it starts the very moment that it becomes rock. Problem is they smell things. They can tell when somebody's trying to pull over something, and that would embarrass them. I didn't want to embarrass a lab, but I just wonder what the date of that rock would be, because it's dependent upon how quickly the potassium becomes argon. That's the millions of year dating method that most millions of years dating methods are based on, is the dating of lava, not carbon-14. Anyway, I know I'm going to get now more questions on that. Let's keep going. So that's igneous rock. Okay, all that on igneous rock. Metamorphic, marble, nice. Okay, metamorphic rock is rock that's been cooked into some other form. Sedimentary rock is the most common of all rocks, 75%. And almost all sedimentary rock was formed with water. So when you look at the Grand Canyon, that's almost entirely sedimentary rock. Very little lava. So whatever's been going on in the past has greatly beaten rocks up and formed them into new rock and involved a lot of water, whatever, and that's in the crust of the earth. Okay, so the evolutionist Bible is the geologic column, the layers of rock, because in it are found the inerrant record of the Earth's history. And I actually agree with that, but how you interpret the data is key. This is the standard view, not my view, standard view of millions of years. That's millions of years on the left. And this is usually divided according to life forms: Paleozoic early life, Mesozoic middle life, Cenozoic recent life. But there have been various things that have happened in this fossil record, including the trilobites. Now, have you ever heard of a trilobite before? Trilobites are these little water bug, kind of like water cockroaches kind of thing. I don't know what. Anyway, they are extinct. That's good. They were anywhere from that big to this big, okay? What's interesting about them is they're at the bottom of the fossil record, first things covered up in the flood or evolved first, whichever. Now, what's interesting is they have fully complex eyes. Now, evolutionists will agree that eyes are among the most difficult things to explain from an evolutionary standpoint. I talked about that earlier. But here's the thing about trilobites. Trilobites, and there are trilobite nerds by the thousands. There's collecting societies. Trilobites are big. More than 100 species. There's some that have eyes like insects. There's some that have eyes like fish. There's some that have eyes on poles. Okay? There's almost every typical kind of conceivable eye among some species. And that is extremely hard to explain at the bottom of the fossil record on how quickly things could evolve into such complexities right away. Of course, this is part of the Cambrian life explosion, evolution explosion. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organism existed, as we showed this before, that could have not been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would break down. Now, and again, I showed you this, but here's the thing that's interesting about evolution's tree of life. Check this out. If there is no other science quote you get today, this is the one you must keep, all right? This one. Because this is spoken of by none other than what I consider to be the Pope of evolution, Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard, the biologist who was on every PBS and every Nova story on evolution because he was funny, he was articulate, he was brilliant, and he said things that were very quotable. This is what he said. The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. Now, what's a trade secret? Do you talk about this publicly? Do you get quoted in the newspapers by these? Or is this stuff that you talk with your peers about? Guys, we got problems in this. Okay, that's a trade secret. Now, he's admitting this. He's a paleontologist. Transitional forms in the fossil record, the evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks, have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. All the rest is inference, reasonable. It's reasonable inference, however reasonable. It's just not the evidence of fossils. What is he saying? Tips and nodes of the branches. Take a look at this now with this quote in mind. He is saying, we've got fish, we've got frogs, we've got dinosaurs, we've got horses. We just don't have any pre-fish, pre-frog, pre-dinosaur, or pre-horses. We don't have any fossils along this here. None. We've got fossils at the end of these branches and the tips and the nodes, but not on the basic trunks. You get that? And that's a trait secret. You've heard of missing links? We're talking missing chains. Okay? That's what he said, and that's the trade secret of paleontology. Okay? Not the evidence of fossils. In other words, their belief in it is not, so he admits it, it's not supported by evidence, only by inference. Got it? Okay. Pretty cool. Stephen Jay Gould, big problem for evolutionists is missing links. Now, Darwin knew all about this in his day. He knew there were problems in the fossil record, and this is what he predicted would be happening. He said, we're going to find lots of new fossils. You bet. They're going to fill in all those gaps, and you watch. There won't be any missing links at all. Okay, now let's fast forward to today, and an evolutionist speaking about the subject. We are now about 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. Just like he predicted, we have found fossils. Yes, we have. But we now have 250,000 fossil species, but the situation hasn't changed much. We have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. Okay, now what does he mean by that? Fewer examples? That means, like, for instance, a horse. How many of you have seen this in textbooks? Okay, I had this in my textbook growing up. Horses, yeah, look at that. You got a little horse with multiple toes, and he's evolving into a single-toed big horse. Well, there it is. Makes sense to me. Only problem? Fossils don't support this at all. But it's still in the textbooks. And when you ask evolutionists, well, why do you still have this in the textbook when the fossil record doesn't support this? It's inference, but it's not supported by the fossils. In fact, you can make a good case that the fossils do not would support something else than this model. And this is what they will say. Well, we agree that the fossil record is not helpful here, but we still think that it's presenting a model that we'd like to be promoting. We think this is a good model in science to promote, even though the fossil record doesn't support it. So we are married to the model, whether the fossils are supportive or not. Now, let me give you another example. Evolutionists believe that a bat is a mouse that grew wings. And you can get that. Look at it. I mean, obviously, there's some similarities. So how does it grow wings? Now, what did Darwin say about evolutionists? His thinking was that it would be little gradual changes. So to go with Darwin, you've got to imagine that if you go down below the bottom of the fossils for bats, and if you go lower below them, you should find 50-50. Half mouse, half bat, or 70-30 or 30-70 or something like that on the way with little changes from mice to bats. Is that what we find? Now we just find bat and mice fossils. That's all we find. And the bat suddenly shows up and the mouse suddenly shows up. And that's what we find. So take a look at these critters. These critters are very unique in their shape. When you see them, you know what you got. Very unique shaped things. And whenever these show up in the fossil record, they are immediately there without anything on the way to becoming it. And you would be able to tell it, I would think. Let me show you one I have here. Now this is from the most famous, I think, the most famous fossil quarry in the world, and that's Solnhofen limestone quarry in Germany, in the Alps in Germany. This is where the Archaeopteryx was found. This is Middle Jurassic layer, so that makes this 130 million years old, supposedly. This is a shrimp fossil. And you tell me if that's in any way, I mean by antennas, legs, shapes, proportions, is this any way different than a modern shrimp? Don't tell me you just saw one on your plate. But that is a shrimp. And it is supposedly 130 million years old, would make it a quarter of the way past the entire fossil record. And if you see any evolution going on at all, I'd be curious. It's a shrimp. And this kind of critter, you would see a difference. I mean, no question about it, you'd see something different. So, interesting. Beautifully preserved. Beautifully preserved. How do you preserve these things? Well, you got to have a lot of water. Can you see it okay? Yep. That is a shrimp. Beautiful shrimp. Yep. One more section, folks. Patience. Dum, 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 dum. So Solnhofen, Germany. Right where the Archaeopteryx was found. I wish I had an Archaeopteryx. Well, that's worth money. This isn't, except to me. Okay, I've got a dragonfly up here from Brazil that's supposedly 70-something million years old, and you tell me if it's any different. So the scientists know this, and they've come up with different kinds of models that might explain it. This fellow here from Germany, a German Jew that got out of Germany at the right time, came over to the West and proposed a new system that was not little tiny changes, but he called it hopeful monsters. Maybe a mouse had a bat for a baby. Fits the fossil record better, but hard to explain biologically, and then it had to find something else to make a bat baby with. So that would be challenging too. But anyway, it does fit the evidence. How do you even get a fossil? I mean, look at this. This is a bunch of trilobites on what's called a mortality plate. How do you get them? In fact, look at the fish. We've got billions of fish fossils. In fact, 95% of all fossils are marine fossils. 95%. Requiring water, of course. But take a look at, and why do we have fish fossils? People would ask me this a lot. How do you get, I mean, couldn't they just swim in the ocean with the flood and everything? How do they get preserved? So, if any of you have ever had fish as a pet, had them in a tank, you may know that temperature is very important. If you go too hot or too cold, you're going to lose your fish. So you got to maintain the temperature. We believe that volcanic action during the flood was widespread, and a lot of heated water would have killed a lot of fish, including, and add to that, also the mud that was coming down into the water would make it difficult for some fish to breathe. So that's why we have so many fish, and they're covered up and preserved. But take a look at this beautiful specimen here. It's gorgeous. How do you get, I mean, look at the detail. It's just incredible detail. How in the world do you preserve a fish that well? And this scientist, who is an evolutionist, was an evolutionist, always good for some good quotes. This fellow here said, he's talking about fish fossils especially, the explanation of the origin of fossils by the theory of uniformity and evolution contradicts the fundamental principle of these theories that nothing took place in the past and does not take place in the present. Today, what? No fossils are formed today. It says we believe in these theories that everything has got to continue and nothing took place in the past. Hey, how can that be if we got billions of fossils and we're not making any today? So, pretty good. Oh, okay, here we go. Here we go. Every year, I take one for the team. I go down to Tucson, Arizona in February. I mean, someone's got to do it. I'm going down to Tucson in February for the annual International Rock, Gem, and Mineral and Fossil Show. It is the world gathering of all sources of these things. They take over Tucson, Arizona, and I just bite my lip and I take one for the team to leave the beautiful Northwest to go to Arizona in February. But I'm going to do it again this year. Last year, I went to it and I asked the Lord in that morning that question, Lord, help me find something that helps me with my talks today as I go to the various dealers and so forth. And I came across this guy selling, this company was from British Columbia, from Alberta, and the Rockies in Alberta, and they were featuring these shells. Take a look at these shells. These are not just simply opalized. These have a coating on them called aragonite. There is nothing like them in the world. In Madagascar, in Africa, they have beautiful ammonites that are nautilus-type shells, but they're covered with opal, and they're beautiful too. But this is off the scale fabulous. Well, that particular shell was this big. And it had every color of the rainbow just shining and beautiful. And I asked the guy, can I take a picture? Sure. So I took a picture. I would like to have bought one. They were $60,000. Okay. Now they had some cheaper ones, 45, 40. They're fabulous. And I asked him, can you tell me anything you know about how these were formed? What's the theory about how you get these? Because I'd never seen, there's nothing like them in the world. There are other coatings, but there's nothing like this with a rainbow like that. And he says, well, I don't know much about how they form, but I will tell you this. They are in one place in the Alberta Rockies, and they are under 6,000 feet of sediment. 6,000 feet of water-laid sediment, over a mile. So these are obviously aquatic animals. These are ocean swimming type, nautilus type animals that got covered with 6,000 feet of sediment. The pressure would have been incredible, that much weight on top of it, and somehow or other the chemicals and the pressure come together to form this beautiful thing. Sad, because this beauty represents the death of millions upon millions of animals and people in the tragic event of the flood. But still, something to talk about. I bought that much. That's all I could afford. But anyway, in fact, I asked him, would he take a little less? He said, no, we'll sell it. I'll take it. Yeah, gorgeous things, but sad. Evidence of the flood. Evidence of the flood. Okay, now where did I lay it? Yeah, there it is on the corner. I have to walk. You know that cell phones were invented for me, or wireless phones, because this is how I am when I'm talking on the phone. Anyway, here we go. So, big problem for creationists. I'm going to wind up with just a couple of things here. We've got problems too, and that's fossil order. If I don't mention fossil order to evolutionists, they believe that I am just a Bible-thumping know-nothing, which I might be anyway. But So they're right, there is an issue with fossil. Why are dinosaurs only in certain layers? Why are other things in only certain layers? And there's some truth to that, no question. How did that happen? Well, this fellow here was a British surveyor, first noticed that, at least scientifically, and he called it the faunal succession. He was a surveyor in England. He noticed that certain shells were always in certain layers, and I mean no other places. He noticed that and talked about it. Now, here is a piece of sandstone that I have in my collection. It's about this big. It's in my office. Come visit me and you can see it. Anyway, that's Dr. Leonard Brand on the right from Loma Linda University. He's aware of this. It's called Coconino sandstone. It's from near the Grand Canyon. It's Permian era, which supposedly makes it 250 million years old. In this sandstone are the footprints of what appears to be a lizard, or several lizards, same kind, with about an inch wide foot. And they appear to be going mostly in one direction. And what's interesting about them is that they have this mound of sand at the back of each impression. That mound right there is typical as you go up these footprints. Now, here's what Dr. Brand wanted to do. This was considered to be a dry desert formation, not involving water, but because it has a lizard with no webbing, it seems to have been a desert lizard of some kind. Incidentally, never found a bone of it. But anyway, made these footprints. And so, was it really a dry situation when these were made? He wanted to see if he could duplicate this mounding. So he got himself a tank in Loma Linda University, put sand in it, took a salamander and said, "You are my volunteer. Start walking." So we walked in the sand and tried to make footprints. Well, when it was dry, could not equal that. Put water in there, still couldn't eat it. Put more water in there, make it pretty damp. No, still couldn't do it. Put so much water in there that the animal literally was splashing as it's walking, and that did it. So had the mound left behind the footprint, what that is showing, and please notice that these footprints, which are very typical, have the animals walking mostly in one direction. There's at least 3 of them walking here, and they're all going in the same direction. Why? They are trying to get away from rising water. Now, this is important for us to understand the condition of what was taking place during the flood. Because if you are like me, and I was a little kid, I'd heard about the Bible flood, I imagined that everything was like a giant washing machine, just churning and hurting everything all over, and then eventually when the water left, it would just kind of settle out, kind of homogeneous, everything mixed together. That's not the way it is at all. It's in layers, certain things in certain layers. This helps us because this tells us that the water came up slowly. And animals had time to move and react to the rising waters. Now, if that's the case, then that means animals tended to gather in certain areas, certain zones, certain ecologies, and get buried together. And water would slowly keep going up to the next one and catch animals at certain other areas. That makes some sense the way we find animals collected. This makes sense. Now, I'll hold off. I bet you got questions. We'll get to them. I just want to briefly hit the Noah's Ark story. How big was the ark? How big was the ark? Okay, thanks. So always somebody says it's big. What? 300 cubits. What's a cubit? Show me a cubit. From here to here. Okay. For a 6-foot tall man, yes. I'll just leave it at that. We'll let you figure out. When Moses is describing the ark and the building of it at 300 cubits long. Now, was this Moses' cubit or, well, just leave it to you to figure that out. Let's go with conservative cubits. Let's go with cubits today. 450 by 75 by 45 high. 3 decks with 1.5 million cubic feet capacity. And if you use modern day train cars to fill them, how many train cars could it support? And frankly, it could support 522. That's a pretty long train. So the capacity inside the ark was maybe more than you might have thought. But anyway, pretty big. Now, let's talk about what was inside. This is a big question. Could we have had all animals by species? Of course not. We could not have all the species in the world. Some estimates as high as 1 million species today. Incidentally, you know we're losing species every day? Whether you believe the climate change or whatever kind of thing is going on, and this is an excellent opportunity for animals to adapt and change according to changing climate conditions. We're watching for that. So far, no. But we are losing species every day. And I've heard a Japanese evolutionary scientist quoted. I saw him, and he had the footnotes, what he was saying. And he said, evolutionary trees are in textbooks like this. They should be like this, because we are losing species, not gaining them. That's interesting. Anyway, but what did they have on the ark? I heard a lecture by a creation biologist, a university professor, talk about this. And he says he believes that what they got onto the ark by were family, the family level. And that is basically, okay, 2 cats for all the cats, 2 wolves for all the dogs, dingoes, coyotes, foxes, you name it, those animals. Let me talk about cats for a minute. Have you ever been down to that petting zoo near, is it Bandon? Bandon down by the coast below Coos Bay? Is that the new name of it? Okay. Is that the petting zoo? Okay, thank you. What is the name of it again? West Coast Deer Park. As I was coming up one day, I was a speaker and I had an afternoon. I'm driving down just looking around the area, and there's a sign saying petting zoo ahead. And I thought, Mom, Pa, what? Goats? You know what? So I'm getting closer and it's saying largest one in North America. Well, okay. So, so I did pull in there, and it was really interesting. I got to hold a red fox cub. Aw, little baby, very cute, and some other cool things. But they also had a snow leopard cub. What would you call it? Kit. Is that right? Okay. Anyway, it was just 1 week past 1 year old, and because of that, the trainer said, "I'm sorry. Federal law says if it's over a year, I can't let you touch it." And we're like, ah! But anyway, he was able to do some things in front with this cat. And it had a feather ball on a string and was playing with the cat. And this cat was bouncing off the walls trying to get this feather ball. And I looked at this, I said, it's a cat. This is a big cat. I've had cats. This is one of them. The point is, they're all in the same family. They're all similar. So there's some similar DNA in there. Here's the thing. I've got yet another theory, another beautiful theory you can't disprove, and this is what I think. I believe that the families, both in those days, let me use humans to start with as an example. Once Noah and his family got off the ark and they start to register the generations after Noah, they mention, gentlemen, one of the grandsons of Noah was Cush. Cush in Hebrew is black. And for most of the rest of the Old Testament, Cush means an African. Cushite is usually an African. Already within 2 generations from Noah, they're already having the races of man coming out. The DNA, the vitality of those people living, of course, he lived 900 years, right? They were healthy, they were strong, and they could make a variety of children. They were able to have the races quickly within just a couple of generations. Now, I think that the animals were the same way. I think the animals, pre-flood animals, likewise had this powerful, healthy, vital force that I think they were able to provide quickly within a few generations a variety of species. I mean, I'm a birder, okay? Sorry, I'll admit that. I'm a birder. And I know, I mean, what's a downy and a hairy woodpecker? A downy is a stretch version. No, a downy is a squished version of a hairy woodpecker. A hairy woodpecker is a downy that you would... It's the same bird. Different species. Same bird. So the point is, it had a common ancestor, no doubt about it. It came from a single. So to me, the healthiness of those first off the ark people and animals provided a rapid expansion. It says, God said, multiply. When he said multiply to those getting off the ark, I don't think he was just talking numbers. I think he was also talking about variety and fill the earth with all the different beautiful things we have in the earth today. Anyway, that's my theory, and you can't disprove it. So, anyway, but even if they had 16,000 pairs, when that biology professor was talking about families, I asked the question, how many are you talking about for animals? He said 800 pairs. Wow, okay, that'd be more than less than I would think. I mean, I think of giraffes, and giraffe is an antelope. I mean, would they represent something different than just antelope? I don't know. So it might be more, but anyway, not too many. 1,600 animals plus revisions. They still have over half of the ark left. And my question, let's see if you get the answer as well as your kids typically do. Why was there so much room on the ark? And the adults will typically say, place for babies, place for poop, place for other things, this going on. You know what the kids will typically say? God wanted to save more people. I like that. I think God had room for more people. I think he did. I'm going to close with just an illustration from a science quote. My goodness, 5 o'clock. It means you got to come up with an hypothesis. These are environmentalists. These are population experts, evolutionists. We don't have enough people on this planet. If we came out of Africa 1 to 2 million years ago, we should be walking down the streets of Whipple Creek and Battleground and Vancouver like this. Excuse me, pardon me, excuse me, pardon me. There should be many more people than we have. They know this. This is what they say. You got to come up with a hypothesis for an event that wiped out the vast majority of that variation. Something caused the human population to drop drastically. When or how often that may have happened is anybody's guess. Possible culprits include disease, environmental disaster, and conflict. Something happened in our past that got us down to, I don't know, like 8 people before we bounce back. What happened? Are you with me on this? Don't you just want to be the kid in the class, say, ooh, 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 ask me. So, anyway, okay. What happened to the evidence of pre-flood man? 2 things to remember. First of all, the Hebrew description is this. God was so sorry that he made man, and this to me is a tough thing for me to read. Can you imagine God being sorry that he made man? In his image, God was sorry. Sorry that he'd made man on the earth and he was grieved in his heart. Incidentally, the word Hebrew heart for heart there is gut. It hurt right here. Not this pumper here, right here. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I've created from the face of the earth. The word destroy there is like a Jewish housewife with her dishes at the sink, and this is what she does. Wipes them right off, clean. I'm going to do this to man. Gone. Okay? Evidence is pretty scarce, isn't it, about what happened to man. Now, I will just quickly say this. We don't know why there's not too many human remains, but remember the description of the flood. Remember that, first of all, I showed you the footprints, and animals had time to react. Would people have time to react? Where would they go? Top of the mountains, top of every mountain. They'd have time to get there if they moved in a hurry. And what happens when the water gets up to them? There's no further place to go, and they are drowned. Now, is there any other material above them that could cover them? Nope, because they would be in the water. Now, beyond that, what happens? It says when the water got to the top of the mountains, there was another 120 days. And the waters moved. And I mean, basically, the waves roared and the waters were stormy and back and forth. For 120 days, what are you going to do with anything that's left in the water? Also, frankly, anything that's in the top layers of the fossil record are pretty damaged. And if you go to John Day today, and you will see pretty much the top of the fossil record in Oregon, and those are mammal fossils, and they are, in my opinion, fairly damaged at the top, fairly scarce at the top, because that's where the waters were, doing its damage back and forth for 120 days. So what happened to people? God said he would wipe them off the face of the earth, and he did a good job. And I told you a couple of the physical reasons why maybe they aren't here. I still think we may find some, but we'll see. What started the chain of events? Well, I still think meteors. As I rebuked, the flood waters fled. At the voice of thy thunder, they hastened away. The mountains rose, the valleys sank. Mount Everest, 26,000 foot level of Mount Everest. There are seashells on Mount Everest toward the top. Now, how in the world did they get there? You have one of two options. Either the water got that high, or the mountain used to be down here. I think the mountain used to be down here, and the Himalayas formed rapidly. Okay, moving on. That's it, basically. Oh, no, I told you about that. I'm going to skip that. But I'm going to basically end with this slide. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking. Jesus seems to think the flood was a historical event. They were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. So, conclude with this thought. The day is coming when the Seahawks are in training camp, when somebody in Washington, D.C. says something that gets everybody excited, when there will be a bomb go off in the Middle East, there will be a very interesting divorce going on in Hollywood, there will be a pileup of cars in Portland somewhere, traffic jam, and Jesus will come. That suddenly, to a world just going on its day-to-day thing. Because that's what Jesus said. It caught everybody off guard in the flood, and he takes that to be just like it's going to be when he comes. Why do I do any or all of this? It's because I want as many people ready as possible. I show you evidence of the flood because I want you to understand from all evidence it happened. And because it happened, that's going to happen. And because that caught a lot of people off guard and a lot of animals and everything, and it was a terrible, tragic event, I don't want this to be a tragic event for any of you. So would you please join me in being ready for that day? Amen? I'm going to have you stand and we'll have a closing prayer. Thank you for your patience, and I've gone on too long. But here we go. Heavenly Father, the events that Scripture described, just a couple of chapters in Genesis talking about the flood, and yet worldwide, all nations, all tribes, all ancient peoples remember that day and talk about it in their history. The evidence from geology is powerfully strong. And Father, Jesus even said, just like the flood did happen, his second coming will come. And my dearest thoughts on this is to imagine everyone in this room ready to meet Jesus. Everybody's safe inside the ark before the door closes. I don't know where the hearts are. You do, Father. You know where everyone is in that question. And I pray that your Spirit will move on them, help them to make the right decisions, help them to make changes if that's necessary, help them to get to the place where they will be safe. Father, if there's anything any of us can do to help them get there, as people have helped us, may that be granted to us. For we want all our friends, family, neighbors, all the guests that are here today be ready. And to that end, Lord, we dedicate ourselves and we look forward to that great day. We pray it in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, folks, for coming.